Do you think you could recognize a serial killer in real life? What if you met such a person in a place where you would naturally assume that no one would or could hurt you on purpose? Serial killers don't wear tacky masks, carry a chainsaw, or stare at you unblinkingly while sipping chianti. Horror movies leave a false impression that some obvious signs in their looks or behavior would be an instant red flag. Real life isn't so simple. Real evil people can seamlessly blend into the fabric of society and give their victims a false sense of security. One of the places we lower our guard is at the hospital. We trust the doctors and nurses with our lives, literally. That's where killers in the medical world feel like kids in a candy store. Sometimes the underlying motivation of some killers are traits that are commonly regarded as honorable. An uncontrollable desire to save people and be recognized as a hero fueled Richard Angelo. He signed up as a volunteer fireman at the earliest age possible. After graduation as a top student, he became the night supervisor at a hospital's special care unit, gaining access to some of the most vulnerable patients. Richard aspired to make himself a hero by arriving on the scene just in time to save his victims. So he came up with a clever plan to administer a deadly cocktail of paralyzing drugs. He killed 25 before being discovered. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe, the host, and thanks for joining. In responding to emails that I get about this podcast, people suggesting stories or telling me something about their lives, recently there have been quite a few that mentioned a phrase along the lines of, "There's so much evil in this world." Yeah, I agree with that. I think that being a part of the true crime community, and if you're listening to this podcast, this includes you as well, but a hefty negative of that, in all of the information that we consume, your eyes are open to a few things. First of all, the unadulterated evilness that exists in this world. Another, the mental health crisis that we're dealing with. And then there's our broken legal system. We can put away a first offense, drug-addicted, possibly mentally unwell person for the majority of their life because they got caught with some crack. But as you've heard in this podcast before, we'll let out actual murderers because of good behavior. They behaved themselves in prison or whatever. And then they go out and they kill other people. The system is far from perfect, but it's what we've got right now. So yeah, I do believe that evil exists in this world at a higher level than most people recognize. And today's story falls along those lines. Before we get going with it, this is your reminder to subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts and connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links are in the show notes of this episode as well as at 10minutemurder.com. Now to the story. Richard Angelo was born on August 19, 1962, in West Islip, New York, as the first and only son of two educators. Richard was raised by Joseph Angelo, a guidance counselor, and Alice, a home economics teacher on Long Island, New York. According to neighbors, he didn't have any of the markings of a future killer as a child. He was described as a nice boy with nice parents. After graduating from high school in 1980, he studied at the State University at Stony Brook for 2 years, and then switched to a 2-year nursing program at the State University at Farmington. Being a top student, he achieved the highest grades, making the dean's list each semester. After graduating as a registered nurse, he worked briefly at 2 Long Island hospitals before he landed a job at Good Samaritan Hospital in April of 1987, which is where this story begins. He was 26 years old back then. A highly qualified nurse, a volunteer fireman, and a former Eagle Scout, he made a great impression on his employers. Little did they know that he didn't want to actually save people or help them, but his impressive resume rather served his desire in being seen as a great rescuer. Throughout the course of his life, he got used to an outstanding level of praise he earned. Richard always got top marks and was better than most, receiving several awards. Soon, he realized that this admiration fest does not continue at work. While simply doing his best at work, he didn't get straight A's because there were no straight A's to be gotten, and there were no diplomas to earn. In pursuit of the worship he was used to, he decided to create certain situations. like forcing his patients to knock on death's door by injecting unprescribed drugs. As the scene was set, the lead actor could walk onto the stage and perform Shakespeare-like drama and show off his heroic capabilities in the battle with death. In his mind, he would impress his colleagues and be decorated again as a hero. And most definitely, Angelo didn't really care how many innocent lives he would have to sacrifice on the way to create the perfect circumstances to make the patient hover between life and death. He seemed to take the words of Lord Farquaad by heart. Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. And yes, I just quoted from Shrek. Mind your business. As a newcomer, he worked from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the ward for patients requiring intensive care, which he seemed to like. Taking night shifts at the Good Samaritan Hospital provided perfect conditions for his experiments because the loss of patients in intensive care is not unexpected. Soon, statistics of unusual emergencies seemed to increase when Angelo was at work, leading to a total of 37 code blue emergencies during his shifts in a 6-week period. In the latter months of 1987, patients who were appearing to recover at a normal pace started to die off without any apparent cause. Out of 37 patients, 25 died before the angel of death could have saved them. Leaving morals and empathy at the hospital's doormat, he continued injecting various combinations of drugs, including one used as a general anesthesia for surgery to provide skeletal muscle relaxation. Sudden, suspicious deaths in a few weeks' span alarmed the doctors. Finally, Angelo, like many other serial killers, made a mistake. His misstep was approaching another would-be victim while they were still awake. One of the patients, Guillermo Kusic, noticed that something that the bearded male nurse administered rapidly made him severely ill. Kusic said that Angelo, quote, opened up his coat and pulled out something that looked like a pen. Then he said, quote, now you're going to feel much better. He injected a drug into his tube, immediately causing the man to feel numb and making it difficult for him to catch his breath. Despite starting to lose control over his muscles, he managed to ring for help before the paralysis drugs overpowered him. Other nurses rushed to the scene as Angelo fled. One of the nurses who responded to the patient's call had his urine sample tested. Soon, the presence of previously mentioned drugs, which could have led to death by suffocation, was revealed. After the victim's life was saved, he became the first witness to notify authorities. The next day, the police conducted a search in Angelo's work locker and home, discovering vials of the very same drugs the test proved positive for. These discoveries led to his arrest in November of 1987. The bodies of other people who suffered similar conditions resulting in sudden death were exhumed and tested for the same substances. Of the 10 deceased patients, the test proved positive as well. The killer nurse made headlines, and Angelo was nicknamed the Angel of Death in the press. His lawyer's line of defense was to prove that Angelo suffered from dissociative identity disorder, and it was a different personality that poisoned the victims, while the real Angelo was not aware of it. Other experts stated that Angelo simply suffered from a personality disorder and he knew exactly what he was doing. The jury convicted Angelo of 2 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree manslaughter, 1 count of criminally negligent homicide, and 6 counts of assault. He was sentenced to 61 years to life. Richard Angelo, the fallen Eagle Scout, who instead of being a guardian and defender of honor became an idealistic overachiever in the medical field. The motivations behind his choice to seek a career in medicine and murder are undoubtedly complex, but one perk was the steady supply of victims, often frail and defenseless, occasionally even completely unconscious. Death doesn't come as a shock in hospitals or nursing homes, especially among the elderly and seriously ill, so Angelo hoped to be shielded from suspicion. However, when medical professionals turn out to be killers, not healers, it's always wholly shocking and deprives us of a sense of security from those whose lives are in their hands.